My name is Imrana Mahmood, and today is the 5th of September, and it's just turned 10 o'clock. And I'm really happy to say that the sun is out. I know that some of you have probably sent your wonderful children back to school today. For myself, my youngest has just gone into high school, so it was a very, very big day. And I think, we've had, alhamdulillah, had a really, really wonderful summer, as I hope you all have had as well. For today's show, however, I know that there will still be children who are at home, who might be maybe starting tomorrow. If you've got very young ones, maybe they're even starting next week. If you've got older ones who are kind of well into their kind of late teens, maybe starting college or, maybe, entering university, they might still be off for a couple of weeks. So today's show, I thought, will be a bit of a mix. So the first half, I'll be focusing a little bit on books that are kind of aimed for children. And having said that, though, both the books I'm going to discuss in the first half of the show are actually two of my favourites as well. So even though they are aimed at children, they are suitable for all ages, and definitely ones that I would recommend that you can read with your children. You can read them yourself. They're really, really beautiful stories. In the second half of the show, I will be focusing a little bit on poetry. So I grabbed a brilliant bargain from Verve Poetry Press. So they're an amazing independent publisher, and they had an offer on actually some poetry books. This was during the summer holidays, and I bought 4 wonderful books. Thank God I had a bit of space left still on my bookshelves. So yeah, I haven't actually started reading them. So I thought, why not share them and kind of delve into them on today's show. And if you have any thoughts, obviously feel free to kind of WhatsApp in or contact the studio. I would love to hear from you. But yes, so let's go straight into the first book of today. And this is quite a well-known book. Some of you may have heard of it. It's called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. And this has been written by Charlie Mackesy. It's a really beautiful book. So as you know, I always start with reading the blurb just to give you a bit of an idea of what the book is about. And what's really wonderful about this book in particular is it's very well known for its beautiful illustrations. So the book has not only been written by Charlie Mackesy, it's also the illustrations are by him as well. So as you open the book, it's really beautiful. It says, this book is dedicated to my lovely, kind mum and my wonderful dog, Dill. So he starts off right at the beginning of this story, almost basically writing a letter to the reader. And I think that's a very kind of, I guess it's a nice dedication when you open a book and there's a direct kind of note. And I know lots of books obviously have that. Sometimes it might just be a forward or whatever it might be, a prologue or something, just to give you a bit more information. So basically, he says, Charlie, right at the beginning of the book, so hello, you started at the beginning, which is impressive. I usually start in the middle and never read introductions. It's surprising that I've made a book because I'm not good at reading them. The truth is, I need pictures. They are like islands, places to get to in a sea of words. This book is for everyone, whether you are 80 or 8. I feel like I'm both sometimes. I'd like it to be one you can dip into anywhere, anytime. Start in the middle if you like. Scribble on it. Crease the corners and leave it well thumbed. The drawings are mainly of a boy, a mole, a fox and a horse. I'll tell you a little bit about them, although I'm sure you'll see things here that I don't, so I'll be quick. The boy is lonely when the mole first surfaces. They spend time together gazing into the wild. I think the world is a bit like life, frightening sometimes, but beautiful. In their wanderings, they meet the fox. It's never going to be easy meeting a fox if you're a mole. The boy is full of questions. The mole is greedy for cake. The fox is mainly silent and weary because he's been hurt by life. The horse is the biggest thing they have ever encountered and also the gentlest. They're all different, like us, and each has their own weaknesses. I can see myself in all 4 of them. Perhaps you can too. Their adventures happen in springtime, where one moment snow is falling and the sun shines the next, which is also a little bit like life. It can turn on sixpence. I hope this book encourages you, perhaps, to live courageously with more kindness for yourself and for others, and to ask for help when you need it, which is always a brave thing to do. When I was making the book, I often wondered, who on earth am I to be doing this? But as the horse says, the truth is everyone is winging it. So I say, spread your wings and follow your dreams. This book is one of mine. I hope you enjoy it as much. Let me just read that again. I hope you enjoy it and much love to you. Thank you, Charlie. So that's basically the little kind of note, I guess, to the reader from the author himself, which I think is a really lovely way to start a book. I like what he says about the fact that he doesn't expect people to necessarily start from the beginning, that it's a book that you can kind of dip in and out of. And you can definitely, start even from the middle of the book. So I thought actually this would be a really great book to start the show off with. So it's called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. And I'm going to take the author's advice and literally start somewhere in the middle as opposed to the beginning, because I have read this book before. I've read it with my children. We sometimes take turns to read a page. Sometimes, at bedtime, it's kind of a nice routine for something just to help you wind down and actually have some really, I guess, deep conversations as well, if you want. So I've just opened a page, it's about in the middle. So here you've got the horse who's kind of lying down, and then you can see the boy, the fox, and the mole are also sitting with him. And there's the first quote is, "When have you been at your strongest?" asked the boy. "When I have dared to show my weakness." So that's obviously the boy asking the horse. So I think what's really lovely about this book is each page is literally tends to have maybe one character asking another character a particular question. And then you have a response. But some of them are really, really profound. And even though they're quite simple, I think it gives a lot of kind of reason just to contemplate about life, which I think is really lovely. So even this one, the fact that, as the author says, the horse is the largest creature that they have in terms of their kind of group of four, but the fact that he is also the gentlest. But to ask, I guess, somebody who you might see as bigger, that you might see as, I don't know, not necessarily feeling inferior to them or anything like that, but just thinking that maybe this person's bigger, so they're stronger. So for the boy to ask the horse, when you feel you've been at your strongest, but for then the horse to reply, "When I've dared to show my weakness," I think is really a beautiful kind of statement, because I know we talk a lot about sometimes vulnerability, and sometimes being vulnerable or showing vulnerability can sometimes be seen as a weakness by some. I think sometimes in society we aren't, or we don't necessarily applaud or see people who show their vulnerabilities as someone who is, or people who are strong. I think this is a really nice reminder that actually, if you can be brave enough to show that you have a weakness, there is definitely strength in that. And I guess for the actual reason, because it can be a very difficult thing to do, especially if it's not something which is kind of looked at in a positive light sometimes, in wider society. So I think that's actually a really kind of lovely quote to start off the show with, and this book. So again, I'm going to open up a random page and just have a think, have a look about what comes up. So this one is, or says, wait, I'm going to have to go, just to give you context, I think, to go the page before. So on this one, the illustration shows the boy, the mole, and the fox. They're sitting together on like a long, kind of thick branch of a tree. And the quote says, "Sometimes I feel lost," said the boy. "Me too," said the mole. "But we love you, and love brings you home." "I think everyone is just trying to get home," said the mole. So this is, again, I think is really, I guess there's a lot to think about when you think about the conversation that in this particular example that the three characters are having. This idea of feeling lost, like what does that actually mean? especially I think from an Islamic perspective, we talk a lot about guidance, the fact that we're Muslim and we want to be following, the straight path. We want Allah to guide us. We have the Quran, alhamdulillah, we have the Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ, and all of these are, forms of guidance for us to be, make sure we're kind of going in the right direction. We literally, for example, the fact that we have the Qibla to show us the right direction of prayer. There's all this sense, I think, of wanting to know where the right path is and maybe doing our best to follow that path. But naturally, again, with our iman, there's times when it will feel very high and there are times when our iman will be very low, and this kind of fluctuation is actually quite normal. And maybe there are times that when our iman is quite low that we might start feeling a little bit lost. And I think that can, really dampens one's spirits. You can really kind of maybe sense maybe sometimes feeling of despair, maybe there's a lot of sadness. But I think the fact that the boy is sharing again, kind of being quite vulnerable with two kind of other characters, the mole and the fox, that he's only just met on this journey. So it's not like they have an existing friendship, from before. So what I'll do is after this quote, we can go to the start of the book, so we kind of have an idea of how the book starts. But yeah, so for the boy to kind of share that, sometimes I feel lost, and then the mole to almost validate, I guess, his feelings by saying, me too, that I also feel lost sometimes. But then to follow that up by saying, but we love you and love brings you home. So again, within really kind of two simple sentences, there's so much kind of depth, I think, to the conversation. One about the idea, I guess, I know obviously there probably is some of me projecting it as well, but this idea of loss and then guidance, but also this idea of home and what does home actually mean? And the fact that how is home, or how are home and love, are they really, intertwined? And maybe there's truth to that. The fact that if you have people that love you, maybe the feeling of home is, to be loved by someone. Or to be honest, you can actually flip that and say maybe the feeling of, love is the fact that, yeah, it's a feeling of kind of coming home. So there's definitely kind of a really kind of deep connection there, I think. And I think, again, it's the fact that the mole has only just met the boy, but for him to say something so, I guess, really encouraging for the boy. Because, when someone's feeling very sad or alone or lost or whatever feelings they're having, for you to, in that moment, to say a word of kindness is something, I guess it's really important. And even though we can probably think, oh, it's probably a really easy thing to do, sometimes it's not. I don't know how many of you, have been in situations where someone has shared something really vulnerable with you. And sometimes it can be, an uncomfortable conversation, perhaps. Or, maybe actually a lot of people find kind of comfort in those conversations where people are sharing really raw feelings, or you're being very honest, for you to really, I guess, share something to make another person feel better. And obviously that's a really lovely thing to do. And then obviously the mole goes on to say that I think everyone is just trying to get home. And again, what does that mean? And again, I guess I think for somebody, who's Muslim, this idea of home, there is a permanent home that we know that we're kind of striving towards. This home in this dunya is obviously something which is temporary. It doesn't mean that kind of devalues it. If anything, it means our life in the dunya is so valuable because we know it's temporary. We want to do the best that we can do with it. But also remember that obviously this is kind of a really long trajectory that we're on, and that we're trying to get to kind of the final destination, which is obviously the home in the akhirah, inshallah. And I guess that's a journey we all share as human beings, regardless of faith and regardless of our maybe culture and background. There is this sense of, wanting to find peace and wanting to, I guess, feel an ultimate sense of, contentment. But obviously as people of faith and as, Muslims, we know that obviously Jannah, inshallah, is the home that ultimately that we want to, strive for. So like I said, what we'll do is, so we will go to the beginning of this book now. So I started somewhere in the middle because that's where Charlie Mackesy says that you can do in this book. But the book we are discussing at the moment is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, which has been written by Charlie Mackesy. So the beginning of the book, obviously I shared already the little introduction that the author gives about kind of why he wanted to write the book, but particularly what was interesting for him to say, actually, he's not very good at reading books, and he really wanted to create something which has illustrations. And the illustrations are very simple, but very beautiful. They're not in color. It is literally, well, having said that, actually, some of them, well, the book cover is in color, and some of the illustrations are, but majority of them is just kind of they almost look like I had to say kind of ink, just the quotes that are written are just kind of in ink writing in quotes, and the same pen kind of markers are used for the illustrations themselves. So going to the beginning of the book and the way the book starts, just to give you a context, is literally there's an illustration of the boy, and there's a big quote that just says hello. And what you can see is what looks like a little mole, which is just kind of dug his way out of a hole in the ground. And that's literally kind of how the book starts. The second illustration is the boy kind of really gently kind of bending over with his arms on his with his hands on his knees, and he's looking at the mole. He then picks up the mole and says, "I'm so small," said the mole. "Yes," said the boy, "but you make a huge difference." So that's literally how the book starts. And I think this is what kind of I was saying, that even though the conversations in the whole book between these characters are kind of quite profound, it's the fact that they have literally just kind of only met. And again, so for the mole to suddenly look up at this boy and realize this boy's much bigger than me, and then to say, "Oh, I'm really small," and kind of maybe feel a little bit out of place. But again, for the boy then to kind of reassure him and say that, yeah, you are small, but you make a huge difference. And again, how I think beautiful life would be if I guess we had these like really lovely interactions with strangers that we meet, of course, just not any kind of random strangers necessarily, but maybe you're walking in the street, or maybe you're in a park, and I don't know, you're making a new friend. It's a lovely way to make, I guess, a new friend. And the second bit goes on to say, what do you want to be when you grow up? So that's the mole who's asking the boy. And the boy says, kind. So again, if someone was asking well, not now. I mean, I'm kind of grown up, maybe not necessarily. Maybe I still have a bit of growing up to do, but I'm sure that if someone had, asked me what I wanted to be when I was growing up, when I was little, I think when I was very young, I probably would have said an astronaut. As I was a bit older, gosh, I'm trying to remember all the things maybe I wanted to do. I'm sure at one point I said it'd be great to want to, become a doctor. I don't know how much of that was probably just me wanting to maybe please my mum and dad, or who knows. I never ended up doing medicine. However, I did do science at university, just to put that at rest. But yeah, so I think I'm sure if I was to ask my children, they would think of some sort of profession. If I would say to them, "What would you like to be when you grow up?" So this is kind of a very surprising answer in this book. The fact that obviously the mole's asking the boy, what do you want to be when you grow up? And for him to say kind. Again, if there was more kindness in the world, or if we were able to celebrate kindness more than maybe sometimes we do, I think, that would be an amazing thing. And even though, maybe that's a negative opinion I'm taking, I think obviously there is a lot of kindness in the world, and we see kindness, all the time. And I think sometimes what happens is when we're rushing around and, we're doing the school run, and we're having to rush to kind of do our work, or, we've got very busy schedules sometimes. Sometimes maybe we forget to kind of pause and just have a think about all the different forms of kindness we might have experienced in a day. I know a lot of people, they enjoy doing kind of bullet journaling. And obviously the idea is that maybe you can do it at the start of the day and have some intentions of what you want to get out of it. Or maybe some people choose to journal at the end of the day and have this space for reflection about maybe how their day is gone and what things they, have, or things that have happened for them to be grateful for. So, again, I guess there's this idea that, maybe if we were to stop and reflect on all the different times someone has been kind to us, or maybe that we've done something kind for someone else, I think it'd be a really lovely way of, viewing the world, especially when there's a lot of sometimes negativity, or we see a lot of trauma, we see some very kind of, sad or scary things that are happening around the world, or even, to be honest, even within, our own country. Is sometimes, you do get a sense of despair, or this sense of kind of overwhelming feeling of, what can I do to make a difference in the world? So I guess both of the quotes that I've just said are kind of linked. The fact that regardless of how small that you might feel, that, alhamdulillah, you are able to make a difference even in the kind of smallest way. And at the same times, yeah, I guess just to be kind. So that book that we've just spoken about now is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. So definitely a book to, if you don't already have a copy, I do recommend that you get one. It's a really lovely gift, if you wanted to give a book as a gift to somebody, both where, regardless of age, it's definitely one to give. The next book is a book I have mentioned on the show before. And again, it's one that you can dip in and out of, just like you can with The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. This is called Tales from Rumi. And the little subheading is Mathnawi Selections for All Young Readers. And this has been edited by A. Fawad Bilkin. So again, with this one, so if you haven't heard of the Mathnawi, this book in particular is aimed at children. The blurb says Rumi is best known for his spiritual poetry, the whirling dance, and certainly for the stories he recorded in his magnum opus, the Mathnawi, which is an astounding compilation of no less than 24,000 verses. Tales from Rumi is a collection of best stories from the world classic. So what I will do is just to kind of round off the first half of the show is share one story from this book and kind of the little moral of the story at the end as well. So this is called The Great Fight. Once upon a time, a man gave an Iranian, an Arab, a Turk and a Greek, whom he saw together, one gold coin between them. In doing them this kindness, he said, "Buy whatever you like with this money." One of the four, the Iranian, said, "I'm going to buy angur with it." The Arab disagreed. "You fool, I don't want angur, I want inab." The third person, the Turk, did not like either of those ideas. "I don't want angur or inab, I'm going to buy uzum," he said. The Greek, who had been watching what was going on, cried, "Stop this foolishness. I want astafil. I'm going to buy astafil with this money." At once, all four of them started arguing, each man yelling that what he wanted should be bought. Fists flew, and fighting hard, they were soon beating each other up. Before long, a wise man who was passing by intervened in the fight and asked what their problem was. The Iranian said, "I want to buy angur with the money we were given." "No, we're going to buy inab," protested the Arab. "I say, let's buy uzum," shouted the Turk. "Neither of those. We're going to buy estafil with our money," insisted the Greek. The sage understood immediately what all four people talking in different languages actually wanted. He said, I can fulfill the wishes of all of you with one and the same gold coin. If you honestly give me your trust, your one gold coin will become as four, and four at odds will become as one united. Then he went and bought 4 bunches of grapes. Sharing the grapes between them, he fulfilled the desires of all four. So the senseless argument found its end. So the moral of the story is, know this: people must understand each other or be lost to quarreling. We can find similarities in our differences when we understand each other. All 4 men in the story, though they did not know it, desired the same thing. They finally came to know this with the help of a wise man who knew many languages. They reconciled through the tongue of mutual understanding and learnt to be one in heart, which is better than to be one in tongue. Purify and unite your hearts so that no speck of dust remains between them. So that is a very short story that I've shared, which is called The Great Fight. And I hope you've understood why, obviously, it's called The Great Fight. Before I read it, I thought, honestly, what is going to happen? They're literally going to be throwing grapes at each other. But yeah, so it turns out that obviously this one gold coin, all 4 of them wanted exactly the same thing, but they weren't understanding one another. So obviously, Maulana Rumi's used the idea of kind of languages to show the fact that, you know, it can cause quarreling, it can cause difference, but actually to use wisdom and to be able to, you know, come together and, you know, for the sake of unity, really, and for that unity then to develop strength and to develop kind of this idea of kind of really strong bonds, which is really important, I think, for humanity. So I think, yeah, it's a really beautiful, very simple example, but a very beautiful one. So that story is from Tales from Rumi, which is Mathnawi selections for young readers. And obviously, there are various stories in the book, which are like that, and all of them have this kind of little note at the end to give you the moral of the story as well. Right, so we are heading over to a break, and I'll be back in the second half talking about poetry. Assalamu alaikum.
This program will continue after the break. Continue listening to Inspire FM. Inspire FM.
Inspire 105.1 FM.
السلام عليكم. بسم الله. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: من رغب عن سنتي فليس مني. That whoever abandons my sunnah is not from me.
हेलो, मेरा नाम डॉक्टर सैयदा है। अपने जिस्म में अगर आपको कुछ ठीक महसूस ना हो रहा हो तो हमसे बात करें। कैंसर के बारे में फिक्रमंद रहकर परेशान ना हो। टेस्ट कराने से ये परेशानी जाती रहेगी। जब तक टेस्ट नहीं कराएंगे तब तक आपको मालूम नहीं हो पाएगा। NHS आपको देखना चाहती है। अपनी GP प्रैक्टिस से राब्ता करें।
A large and elegant wedding and events venue in the heart of Luton, catering for up to 1,200 guests, with a 5-star food hygiene rating, plenty of parking, bridal suite, family rooms and prayer facilities. Crescent Hall's the perfect venue for your wedding, events, parties and conferences. We have some great offers for summer. Contact us to find out more. Call 01582 723386, email bookings@crescenthall.co.uk or search for us online and social media. Crescent Hall, Luton. Conditions apply.
Looking for an accountant? Then look no further. AKUM Accountants cater for all your business needs, including bookkeeping, payroll, VAT, working tax credits, and child tax credits. We can also help with taxi accounts and the formation of a limited company. AKUM Accountants are an accountancy company that's tailor-made for your needs. Visit us at 4A Waldeck Road, Luton, email aq.accountants@hotmail.co.uk or call 01582 755252. AKUM Accountants for all your business needs.
वेस्टबोर्न फार्मेसी हफ्ते के 7 दिन सुबह 9 बजे से लेकर रात 9 बजे तक खुली रहती है। हमारी सर्विसेज में शामिल हैं ट्रैवल वैक्सीनेशंस, स्टॉप स्मोकिंग, डायबिटीज चेक, बच्चों की ग़िज़ा और बहुत कुछ। लुटन और डंस्टेबल में फ्री प्रिस्क्रिप्शन, पिकअप और डिलीवरी सर्विसेज भी की जाती है। इसके अलावा आप मेडिसिन के इस्तेमाल के लिए फ्री मशवरा भी ले सकते हैं। वेस्टबोर्न फार्मेसी 198 B Dunstable Road, Luton, corner of Westbourne Road. Telephone 01582 419 432.
Globally, more than 1,000 children under the age of 5 die daily because of lack of clean, safe water. Help families relieve, provide the poorest villages with clean, safe water, and protect them from waterborne disease. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was asked which charity is the best. He replied, providing water. Join the campaign and help us to save hundreds of lives. If you do one good thing today, call 0114 365 4454 or visit familiesrelief.org.uk and give life with water.
आज भी हम दीन के मामलों में लाइल्मी की वजह से बहुत सारी गलतफहमियों में मुब्तला हैं और इल्म हासिल करना हम पर फ़र्ज़ है। हमारे इल्म में इजाफा करने के लिए मैं पेश करती हूँ प्रोग्राम दीन और दुनिया, हर मंगल की सुबह 11 से 12 बजे तक।
From the studios of Inspire FM, the time is now 10:30.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the book club show on Inspire 105.1 FM. My name is Imrana Mahmood and it's just gone 10:30 on the 5th of September. In the first half of the show, I was talking about two wonderful children's books. The first was The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. The second was Tales from Rumi, which is edited by A. Fawad Bilkin. And I was saying those particular books are ones that you can kind of dip in and out of. They're wonderful introductions, I think, to just for children to get into reading, because it's not like reading a whole, novel, which I think sometimes can be daunting, especially for, young readers or even older readers who maybe feel like they won't have a lot of time to kind of commit to a book. And again, I know that because there are some children at home today, not everyone has gone back to school. I thought it'd be nice just for them to have maybe a couple of ideas of what they can potentially read. But in the second half of the show, I am focusing on poetry, primarily because it's an interest of mine, but also because, as I mentioned at the start of the show, there was a wonderful offer by Verve Poetry Press, and they had I can't actually remember if it was like half price books or 30% off, but it was a bargain. That was the main thing. And even though I know my husband's always saying I've got too many books, I thought, no, you can never have too many books. And as my daughter once very politely reminded him, it's not about the fact that there are too many books, they're just obviously never enough shelves. So for any book lovers out there, that is a fantastic comeback. Just look, I need a bit more kind of shelf space. I mean, that shouldn't be too difficult, hopefully. But anyway, coming back to the books themselves. So I have 4 here, which I'm hoping I'll be able to get through. Obviously, I'm not going to delve in too much. It is really just to give you a bit of a snippet. So the 4 books today that I'll be discussing, the first one is Belongings by Asma al-Badawi. The second is called Khamoshi by Qudsiya Akhtar. The third is Mute Men by Gamal Mahmood. And the fourth is Wild Dreams and Louder Voices. So this is a poetry jam anthology. So that's obviously basically means it's a collection of poems by different poets. And like I said, even though I bought these books during the summer holidays, I didn't actually get a chance to read them. That's not because I wasn't reading. I was actually reading a lot during the holidays, which was a lovely way to spend my time. It's because I was reading a slightly different book, which is called, it's a book by Jyoti Patel, which is her debut book. And I will, inshallah, be interviewing her very, very soon on the book club show on Inspire FM. So obviously keep a lookout for that show. I'm very, very excited for that. But yeah, coming back to the poetry books for today, I will read the blurb for each of them. And then I thought what a nice thing would be to do is just read the first poem in each of the books and obviously just talk a little bit about it. And perhaps, you are really into poetry, you find it quite interesting, so that would be a good introduction. Or maybe you're not really into poetry at all, and maybe I need to convince you a little bit about why reading poetry is very good for, obviously all books are, but there's something about poetry for me anyway, that you might read a certain couplet, or you might read a particular line and I feel that, it hits really deep or something strongly resonates. And it's usually done in a very kind of concise way. So whereas you might be reading a novel and you might read like a whole paragraph, you think, oh, wow, there's some meaning in it. I think poets are able to do it in a way with very few words and able to, create meaning from those words, which I am always, really, really in awe of. So the first book I'm looking at today is, like I said, Belongings by Asma al-Badawi. So Belongings is, as it sounds, a collection of thoughts and feelings that depict the very heart of Asma's life as a British Sudanese woman. A life that contains multiple influences, expectations, and juxtapositions. Her poems are raw and unfiltered. Asma holds a little back in her work, covering subjects personal to her, such as migration, mental health, racism, and sport. These lines that started out as spoken pieces have finally made it to the page to be read and savoured. Asma presents you with that which is hers, her belongs. So there's then a kind of a quote by Hanan Isa, which says, Asma's strong sense of justice and honest exploration of difficult themes infuses a lot of her poetry. The book cover is really beautiful as well. There's literally kind of an illustration of Asma al-Badawi herself, wearing quite traditional kind of clothing and jewelry, which is really nice. So the first poem that of this book shares the same as the title of the book, which is Belongings. So I'm just going to read it to you, and then Kate, maybe share my own kind of initial reflections on it as well. Belongings. Before I am stripped of my belongings and have no tangible hold on the memories I harvested, there is much to do. There will be a time when I will have to answer to a man that is not my father, and he may not be as understanding. Because he wasn't there the first day of nursery as I stood at the lanky school gates in my pink dungarees. Nor was he there the day I confessed that maths is one of my weaknesses. And though I admire the accurate craft of an architect, my hands were not created to build soaring skyscrapers and houses. Therefore, I am changing my degree. He wasn't there to know that the only sibling I have is a brother, and therefore I understand more about toy Hot Wheel cars and BB guns than I do of Barbie and Ken. He may never understand. He may never understand. He may never understand that my whole life I've worked towards becoming the woman I am today. The clothes I give away have the remnants of my life sewn in them. The watches I wear tick between the chapters of my adolescence. The bags I carry bear me from one country to another. The name I give away is the name that was used to register me every day at school. The very same name on my passport and birth certificate. How is it that we erase the history of a woman as if nothing mattered before her wedding day? Sisters and daughters become wives and mothers. With heavy hearts, we are made to say farewell to our former selves. So that's the first opening poem called Belongings, which shares the title of the book, Belongings by Asma al-Badawi. And that's actually the first time I've read it. Like I said, I'm just sharing these poetry books that I've bought, and I'm just kind of sharing them with you. I actually think it's a really powerful poem. I think it's so lovely, the fact that, like I was saying, the fact that I know lots of our children have gone off to school today, and for the poem to kind of, I think, make reference to, I guess, relationship with her father. The fact that no matter who or which other men may come into her, life, or man might come into her life in the future, that man, wasn't there, I guess, like her father was on the first day of nursery, like she said, in pink dungarees. And I think it's such a cute kind of memory, I guess, for a child to have of their parent, or primarily in this case, for a daughter to have a memory of her father doing something as lovely as the school run, and all of that kind of reference in the first part of the poem to her as a child, and the fact that maths isn't one of her best subjects. Honestly, maths is definitely was not one of my best subjects, and it still isn't. When my children need me to help them with maths, I actually send them to their dad. Unfortunately, I'm one of those. You can come to me for English and science and maybe everything else, but maths, unfortunately, is a no-no for me. But yeah, I think there was something really lovely, because, when we read sometimes stories or whatever it might be, there tends to be a lot of focus sometimes on relationships between women. So it could be mothers, daughters, or maybe sisters, or even, between female friends. But to have a poetry book which opens up about Asma's own relationship with, her father. She even mentions, the fact she only has one brother, so she knows more about Hot Wheel cars rather than Barbie. So again, there's something really nice there that you kind of sense, what a relationship is like, with the men, in our lives as well. But then the second part of that poem, and she utters it 3 times, that he may never understand. And this he obviously is referring to who might eventually, a man who might eventually become, her husband. And there's definitely something there, I guess I'm reflecting myself in terms of what does marriage mean, or what makes marriage so sacred. It's the fact that you tend to meet as adults, right? Most of the time, you tend to meet, as adults who maybe don't know much about each other's childhood. And you fall in love with an older version of each other. And then obviously it's through that marriage and that relationship that you learn about each other's childhoods. But again, even though that's something really beautiful, there is this sense from her poem about that, if she is having to almost give up maybe her identity. So, in later on in the poem, the idea that she might need to, change her name in terms of how it's registered at birth, or, and then this question of why we have to necessarily kind of erase the history of a woman. I think, things are changing now. I don't think, women tend to enter marriage. I know many women, especially even from an Islamic perspective, there is no expectation for women to change their name, for example. That is definitely more of a, it could be a Western thing or generally, a cultural thing. So there's definitely something there, or there's power there, and for a woman to keep her own name. That's not to say, if you take your husband's name, there's anything, wrong with that. I guess this is what's really interesting about her poem called Belonging, because what does it mean to belong to a family? What does it mean to belong to the family in which you grew up? What does it mean to belong to a family that you're creating yourself, through marriage, and when you have potentially, your own, children as well. But definitely something about identity where you are a woman, but then maybe you only ever refer to then, what Asma says in her poem. So sisters and daughters become wives and mothers. With heavy hearts, we are made to say farewell to our former selves. So there's, I think, a question there for everybody, that how is society, treating, what does marriage mean to a woman compared to marriage to a man? Does a man, or is a man able to hold on to more of their identity in a marriage than a woman potentially? Is there a question there that maybe she's asking? That's probably definitely for maybe the men to, be able to answer as well. But society as a whole, I think when we talk about patriarchy, obviously there is something there in terms of men kind of potentially holding on to the family name. But obviously that shouldn't necessarily mean the erasure of a woman. And again, I think there's a juxtaposition that she's done really well in terms of the poem, starting off talking about her relationship with kind of her father and brother, and then it leading into what it might mean for her, once she has a husband or she has children. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that she's called it Belongings and not just Belonging. So that in itself, when we talk about some belongings, we're usually talking about objects or, something like that. So yeah, I mean, I thought I think it's quite a powerful poem. I think there's a lot to kind of think about and talk about when we think about women and marriage and families and society, at large, and talk about education. There's so much actually that she's able to cover in this poem. So yeah, I think I'll definitely look forward to reading more of her poems, within this book. So this book, as I said, is called Belongings. It's by Asma al-Badawi. And, some of the different titles of her poems, there's one called Soil, Sacrifice, Summer, Cage. So they're all her poems have got mostly kind of one-word titles. And obviously, as it said in the blurb, a lot of these were kind of spoken word pieces that have been now written on page, and spoken word poetry tends to be a little bit different to what you would class as, I don't know, traditional poetry is the right term to use. But yeah, okay, so that was Belongings by Asma Badawi. The second book, which I bought from Verve Poetry Press, is called Khamoshi by Qudsiya Akhtar. For those of you who are bilingual or able to, who know Urdu, will know that the word Khamoshi means silence. So I'm going to read the blurb and then share the first poem from the book, just like I did with the first book. Can one experience diaspora in the body? Qudsiya Akhtar's poems are silted with female loss, a kind of silence that builds slowly inside generations of migrant women. Through partition, nationalism, racism, sex, and filial duty, these poems ask, to whom do we belong if not ourselves? A motherland calls to its daughters, an adopted country demands to hear her voice. Akhtar's language is rich and exact, fearing sentiment, turning on its heel towards a path entirely of its own. So that's actually a quote, which is by Sandeep Parmar. But obviously you kind of get a feel of what some of the poems are going to be about. So in this one, again, I'm going to read the first poem in the book. And this poetry book is divided into 4 parts. And part 1, she starts off actually with a quote by Muhammad Iqbal from Secrets of the Self that says, "The eye of existence is not familiar with me. I rise trembling, afraid to show myself." That's actually the first time I've come across that quote by Muhammad Iqbal, so I will look more into that. But the first poem then of part 1 in Khamoshi is, "One's life can experience many worlds. Step into the psyche and then out into the day. Harsh lighting awakes the senses, unfolds dreams and tries them on. We slip into states, just like in dreams. Bird turns to bomb. Silence narrates our fits. Sleep stained by the dark. Under our masks, paper dreams tear with the slightest shift of mind, far from complete. Dreams swell with feelings suit our inner selves. Fighting with friction, voices duel. How many selves can one host share? I shuffle characters like a deck. I spark the wire, drive the car. How many roles can one jar hold? When I feel my heartbeat alone, I hear my voice call myself imposter, and the self collapses in silence." So that's the first poem of part 1 in this book, Khamoshi. This is very, very different to the poem I just read by Asma al-Badawi, mainly, like I said, because one is more, I guess, written as spoken word. This one is written, each sentence that I kind of read to you is written over 3 3 lines, if that's kind of a simple way to explain it. So for example, the opening of the poem, "One's life can experience many worlds," there's literally kind of 2 words over kind of 3 lines, and that's how each part of the poem is written. So yeah, I mean, I guess just to reflect on that, one's life can experience many worlds. I mean, gosh, I mean, it's true, right? Because we talk about one life, we talk about this one dunya, but this idea of you through your experiences, it almost feels like each experience is a whole world in itself. I think there's something, in that, even within one lifetime. And definitely it can feel like that. I mean, even if we reflect back to Asma's poem of maybe, your first day of school, that can literally feel like a whole world in itself, all of the emotions and the anxiety leading up to it. The fact that you're starting it's like a milestone, right? I mean, that in itself is an experience. Maybe any children listening at the moment, I don't know how you're feeling if you haven't started back at school yet, or maybe you'll be starting college or university soon. You can feel this sense of anxiety, but sometimes it's mixed with excitement, and there's all these different kind of emotions, and there's a bit of a roller coaster, and all of these things can feel like you're living like multiple things at the same time. But then she goes on to say that you step into the psyche and then out into the day. Harsh lighting awakens senses, unfolds dreams and tries them on. We slip into states just like in dreams. There's something there about dream worlds and realities, and how how do we even tell the difference between the two, right? I mean, there's one thing, oh yeah, because I'm asleep, I must be dreaming. But then, we have things like daydreaming, or then we have this idea of our senses. So our senses while we are awake, we still have those senses even while we're dreaming. And sometimes, you might wake up from a dream and feel, gosh, that felt real. So yeah, I don't know. There's definitely something there about the idea of, but this, she mentions harsh lightning awakens senses. I mean, obviously, as the poet, you never know what the poem meant. There's a lot of poetry tends to be what your own feelings are and what maybe your own interpretation of it is. But she talks a lot in this poem about emotions and different kind of senses, and she makes that comparisons between dreams and reality. But yeah, then, so dreams swell with feelings suit our inner lives, fighting with friction, voices duel. Maybe it's because, sometimes we have different voices in our head, depending how we're feeling, what experience we're going through, maybe a particular conversation that we've had. But what's really interesting when she goes on to say, how many selves can one host share? Because we talk about sometimes as humans, we have different personas depending on who we are with. We might be slightly different, when we're at home with our families. We might be different at work. We might be different with our friends. But all of these are personas of just us as a human, as one character. So yeah, maybe there's a question of how many of those selves can we truly, host as a human being. And then, it kind of alludes, she continues that when she says, how many roles can one jar hold? Because definitely there's the sense of a container, right? So our feelings or our very being, we can only give however much is in our container and whatever spills from it. But yeah, again, how many roles can that one jar hold? And then it kind of ends or nears the end where she's saying, when I feel my heartbeat alone, I hear my voice call myself imposter. And the self collapses in silence. There's something definitely profound in silence. And I think sometimes, and maybe even myself, we tend to fear silence. When we're in company and people go quiet, this sense of kind of awkwardness. I, for example, can't be silent too long on the radio because, that's not the way to do things. People just assume something's gone wrong or there's a technical error. Sometimes you might read something or see something or someone might say something, and maybe sometimes you just do need a moment of silence just to really take on board, give yourself a time maybe to kind of really feel something, which we don't always give ourselves the opportunity to. Yeah, so that's a really interesting poem. So that, and it doesn't really have a title, it's just a number, it's just like number 1, the Roman number 1. And so all the poems have just, not all the poems, in part 1, those are the numbers of the poems. Part 2, it goes on to actually have different titles. So yeah, very, very different. You've got poems which are post 9/11, you've got one called Meditation, one called Shikwa, which is at the end of part 2, which again might be somehow connected to Muhammad Iqbal because he has a poem called, there's Shikwa, there's Jawab Shikwa as well. So that was the second book, Khamoshi, by Qudsi Akhtar. The second book, the third, that I also got from Verve Poetry Press. This is called Mute Men. This has been written by Gamal Mahmood. He is not a relative, by the way, just in case you were thinking that. So it says at the back, in this compelling debut, Mute Men articulates the author's musings born on late bus journeys and silent morning car journeys with his dad. Gamil, it could be Garmel, I don't actually know how he may pronounce his name, focuses on narratives of the off-sidelined within the microcosm of the Muslim immigrant majority area that raised him, as well as internationally exploring the fallout of colonialism, war and displacement. This collection is a brutally honest collage of disconnect of a boy stumbling into manhood, processing a strayed history whilst probing his place in the world. So this is Mute Men. The first poem in part 1 of Mute Men is called Gold. Firstborn boy is a golden child, so bright he should never be looked at directly. A contract with a pulse, the ding of a bell. Or you say, we rejoice, easier to raise, less room for shame. There are no men flinching at the birth. How could they look at their wives the same way? When the azan is recited, right ear to left, obligatory. An aunt rubs chocolate eclair on his soft palate. Every step after a fanfare, stuffed like boxes of old toys. The first samosa to check the oil is hot enough. Love is a blueprint hung over the fireplace. I'm going to leave you with that poem because there's a lot that Kamal Mahmood in his book Mute Men has been able to cover in that. The fact that it's called Gold, in my mind, this idea of like golden child, being a son, but definitely sometimes maybe the pressure that comes with it possibly as well. But yes, I will leave you to think a little bit about Gold by Kamal Mahmood, which was from his book Mute Men. Before that, we were talking about Khamoshi by Qudsiya Akhtar and also Belongings by Asma al-Badawi. I'll be back, inshallah, next week with a new book and, inshallah, a new guest. So I will speak to you then. Assalamu alaikum.
एक वक्फे के बाद साबरा हुसैन पेश करेंगी दीनी मालूमात पर मबनी प्रोग्राम दीन और दुनिया। सुनते रहिए इंस्पायर एफएम।